More Homes for Everyone proposes smart, targeted policies for the immediate term that will make housing fair for hardworking Ontarians and get all types of housing built faster for those who need it and who want it. Our government has skin in the game, and we're doing our part to unlock and fast-track housing.
The housing supply crisis is a countrywide issue, one that will require all levels of government to step up and work together. That is why our government will work with municipalities on vacant home taxes to help address the issue at the local level. We will also consult on ways to discourage construction slowdowns that may be artificially driving up prices. And we will continue to call on the federal government to work with us to increase supply of housing in the province for Ontario families.
The Ontario government introduced a new housing bill today as part of a wider plan to tackle a worsening housing crisis. The Ford government's More Homes for Everyone plan was tabled at Queen's Park this afternoon. It includes dozens of actionable items aimed at reducing red tape and speeding up development in the province. The objective to boost Ontario's housing supply, to build homes faster. That's something experts have been calling for years now. For a closer look at what this means for Toronto home buyers, we're joined live by City Councillor Anna Bilo, as she is also the chair of Toronto's Planning and Housing Committee. Kevin Krigger is the president of TREB, the Toronto Real Estate Board, and Richard Lyle is the president of ResCon. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Councillor, we'll begin with you. We heard from the housing minister today. He thinks he needs municipalities at the table. He suggested that that's not really happening. He said that many are not ready to implement the ambitious policies the province's Housing Affordability Task Force recommended last month. I want to ask you how you respond to his comments.
Well, I think it was a good recognition that he needs municipalities at the table. Housing supply and dealing with the housing situation and the housing spectrum needs the three orders of government at the table. And I think I liked what I heard him saying, that we need to work with municipalities. I think that just saying that if municipalities approve things faster is going to all of a sudden increase supply, it's very simplistic. We do recognize that there's improvements that need to happen. The City of Toronto has been working on it. We have our own change processes. We've introduced things like concept to keys, where we're working into that direction as well. But there's things that influence the supply, that things like supply chain, things like labor, the infrastructure that we need. Those will influence the supply as well. And so it's you can't just point the finger at municipalities and think that that all of that is going to get solved, because it won't.
Yeah, so many factors at play. Richard, help us understand how much red tape developers and builders are dealing with, especially in a city like Toronto.
Well, it's significant. I think, if you can build here, you can build just about anywhere in the world. We've looked at the amount of government bodies and agencies that are involved in the approvals process, and we actually counted 45. So we do have some very significant challenges there, and there is the need to streamline and digitize and modernize the process. Right now, it's not obviously working very well, because we're ranked probably the second lowest country, I believe, of the OECD countries, 35 developed countries, on how quickly we process approvals, applications, that kind of thing.
Right, so let's talk about the province's plan then, Richard. It says it wants to speed up home construction by fast-tracking approvals for land planning, and you say that's something we've been struggling with. Right now, it can take up to 9 months for a building to be approved in this country. Is this a good plan? Did you like what you heard at Queen's Park today?
Well, I think what the government's doing, and the Deputy Mayor said it correctly, they need to have the municipalities on board, and there has been a lot of pushback on the Housing Affordability Task Force report. And I think there's a level of awareness that we haven't quite reached yet with respect to how serious this problem is and how far behind we are. Amongst the G7 countries, we've got the lowest amount of housing per capita and the highest costs. Those are not good metrics. So the challenge is there. I think what the government's doing here is they're taking an incremental approach, which is sensible. I mean, I'd like to see more, of course, But, you know, you've got to bring people along with this. The one thing I really like is the updated housing plans that they're going to have every year, because all too often we've done things like this. We've had reports, we've had recommendations, and then they kind of get forgotten. And this way, I don't think they will be forgotten, and the government has indicated further measures as time goes on. But the real test is going to be if we need the 1.5 million homes, which I would say yes we do, because no one's really shot down that number. Then we have to plan on, okay, how are we going to get there, right? And what do we need to do it? And if by this time next year, for example, we haven't seen any real kind of measurable changes, or maybe just some incremental stuff, but nothing that's going to get us to the 1.5 million, then of course you're going to need further measures. And I would argue that we will need further measures to deal with this issue.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. Kevin, we know that the legislation table today, it doesn't address many of the 55 recommendations the Housing Task Force put out last month, and notably missing from this list is that plan to build 1.5 million homes over the next decade. Many have said this would be a game changer. Is that something you were watching for today, and how disappointed are you that that wasn't included in the province's plan, not today at least?
I think everyone was expecting some form of incremental approach. Obviously, the supply crisis we see ourselves in now is something that's developed over many, many years, really of inaction across many levels of government. And, to expect a plan to come forward that instantaneously addresses all of the concerns and all of the issues is totally unrealistic. So we certainly are encouraged that a number of really positive ideas have come forward, certainly tying in financial incentives to municipalities for speeding up zoning reviews and looking at cutting red tape around the planning process. I think the biggest fundamental change that would ultimately address supply is a review of exclusionary zoning, which basically accounts for probably 70% of land in neighborhoods across the city of Toronto and in many other municipalities as well, looking at opportunities for gentle intensification and as of right opportunities for higher density development really is something that's going to have to come to the forefront, but probably won't happen until after the election.
Right, and for all of that to happen, municipalities have to be on board, right? So, Councillor Bailau, we know the task force wants to do all of these things. It's identified these things as solutions. It wants to add density in neighborhoods as a way of creating more housing. It wants to cut back on development delays. It also wants to eliminate municipal policies that focus on preserving neighborhood character. And it looks like there has been some resistance to that. Richard was just talking about some of that pushback. What do you say? How do you respond when municipalities are accused of pushing back? And do you not think that these are the appropriate solutions here? I mean, we're in the midst of a housing crisis, and it's a very serious problem.
Absolutely. In the city of Toronto, we do have a project going on, which is called the EHON, the Enhancing Housing Opportunities in Toronto, that is looking exactly at that. We do believe that we need to build up the missing middle. We do believe that we speak with our communities. It is important to note that the province is creating a working group with municipalities to address this. I think what they've heard is that maybe a one-size-fits-all across the province might not work. But I do think it is really important to address the exclusionary zoning and to have municipalities having these changes and these conversations. It is part of the solution. There's no question about it. In Toronto, we're well on its way, and we believe it is something that needs to be addressed.
Okay, well, it's good to know that the city is taking that seriously. And I know you've mentioned that the city of Toronto is working on a number of changes. Richard, we'll come to you next. We heard from one BMO economist today describing what we're seeing as a full-scale attack on Canadian home prices. I'm sure you saw that headline. He's painting a pretty grim picture. So I want to ask you, we've been talking about boosting supply for so many months now. Is that even enough to tackle this affordability crisis? Is it enough?
Well, this particular step right now will put a dent in the problem, but as was said, there is more that will need to be done. I have no doubt about that in my mind. Because, you know, we have to approach it from the perspective and say, okay, you know, how are we going to get that 1.5 million homes? What are these various measures going to produce? You know, and then add it up. And that's where the annual updates will be handy, but, you know, we still have an immediate problem right now, and it's very, very serious. I mean, there's a lot of people that are struggling to get housing, and our immigration numbers are going up. We need the immigrants because we have an aging population. But the question is, where are they going to live, and how are we going to produce the housing for them? And then you do have social housing. So there are steps that are going to be needed there because those social housing lists have been growing year after year. And it's connected to market housing because the more expensive market housing becomes, the fewer people can afford it. They end up on a social housing list quite often. So, you know, this requires urgent attention. However, you know, we do recognize that I think you can maybe only bite off so much at a given point in time. The timelines that they've set in this particular step now with respect to site plan approvals and zoning changes is definitely very positive. But there's much more that needs to be done in terms of creating common rules and standards across the province, in terms of as of right zoning, as the deputy mayor said, they got to tackle that exclusionary zoning problem. It's massive. There's a ton of land out there that could be and should be redeveloped, especially for a city like Toronto, which aspires to be a global city. Well, to be a global city, you got to have we got to fix that missing middle problem. You know, the 6 to 12-story buildings on avenues and main streets that, you know, there's been over 20 reports on that, and we still really haven't made any progress on it. So, you know, as someone said, this is a very complex issue. We know what the solutions are, and they're in the hands of various players. You know, there's 3 levels of government, there's multiple agencies and commissions and so on. And one of the things we do need, and this is pointing in that direction, is much more transparency and accountability in the process, because quite often, you know, the development industry pays for the development and building approvals process. Right. And if you know, there should be disciplines on that. There should be key performance indicators, standards, and that kind of thing. And that's where we need to go. Will we get there fast enough? You know, that's arguable. I think we're going to have to move faster on this, and I think time will prove that out to be the case.
Yeah, time is of the essence for sure, and I've run out of time. So, Kevin, I've got about 20 seconds left here. I'll just ask you this, because everybody's watching for what the Bank of Canada does next, right? And it is expected to announce a steep interest rate hike next month. Give us the big picture takeaways here. Talk about the impact. Do you think this will mean fewer bidding wars? Does this cool the market? Does it do anything at all?
I think fundamentally we are in a supply crunch, and that really is what is and will continue to be the biggest driver in the market. We've seen, obviously, part of the plan that came forward focused to demand suppression. We've tried it. It hasn't worked. 2018 was the introduction of the foreign buyer tax. We've seen it impact less than 1% of total transactions produced. So the reality is we're not seeing substantial changes there. Interest rate hikes certainly will take some people out of the market altogether. I think it'll be most impactful on those who are trying to get in largely as first-time buyers. But certainly addressing the supply side is the only thing that will fundamentally affect price.
Okay, supply is the issue once again. Okay, Kevin Krigger, Councillor Bylaw, and Richard Lyle, thank you so much for this discussion here on CP24 tonight.
Thank you.